wait to have this for breakfast tomorrow. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and it's the holiday season, and I thought it would be nice to show you how to make brown bread. I'm actually going to do it two different ways. I'm going to do just a straight plain brown bread, and then I'm going to do a raisin bread, and I'm actually going to add an egg to that and show you two different ways to do it, and we'll put it in the oven and see how it turns out. So with no further ado, let's get started here. So first thing you do, and this is the way I make bread anyway, is you got some water that I just boiled. Okay, now what I do is I take about a tablespoon of flour. This is just regular enriched all-purpose flour, okay? All I do is add about a tablespoon of just cold water. Okay, and I mix that up so that it's like a paste. Yeah, I mix it up so that it's like a paste, okay? And now since we're making brown bread, we're gonna add some molasses. I'm gonna add a 1/4 cup of molasses, okay? It's about a 1/4 cup. I've gone a bit shy of that. I don't fill it all the way up. And if you're experimenting when you're making bread, if you add too much sugar, the bread gets all weird. Okay, so we got a 1/4 cup of the molasses. We got about a tablespoon of water. We've mixed this all together to make a kind of paste, okay? We're gonna add a heaping teaspoon of salt to this, okay? Now we're gonna add water, slowly, and very slowly, in little bits. We're tempering it, right? If you add the water too quickly, it'll turn that flour into something like a dumpling. This sounds complicated, but it isn't. Just add it in little bits and stir it. And the reason I'm doing this in a measuring cup is so that the measuring cup registers about 1 cup. Okay, so I'm going to keep pouring the water in and mixing until it hits 1 cup. And the reason you do this is a Japanese technique of bread making. It just changes the way the flour works. There's more complicated explanation for this. And actually, I'm going to have an article on my Substack page, maritimegardening.substack.com, explaining this recipe, all the ingredients and everything. That'll be up next Tuesday. And you can actually see on this measuring cup, I've marked with black marker, right? The different gradations, right? I got to mark where it's a cup and I got to mark where it's a 1.5 cups. Okay? So I've done this. Now I'm going to add cold water until it reaches 1.5 cups. There, it's at that now. Okay? So I'm adding the cold water so that it's not too hot, right? I'm bringing the temperature back down now. So we're using the hot water to change that little bit of flour we added, and we're using the cold water to bring the temperature down so we don't kill our yeast when we add our yeast. Okay? All right, so there's one mix there. Okay, I'm going to add a cup of flour to this, like so. And just give that a mix. Mix it all in. Just got a stick here. Okay. I'm going to add this uses about 2.5, or 3 cups of flour, thereabouts. Okay. And fill up another cup of flour. I'm going to add about half of that for now. I don't want this to get too stiff yet, because we still have to add our yeast. I like to add the flour before I add the yeast, just so that the flour can, remember the flour is the flour is at room temperature, so it just cools this down a little bit more so that it's not too hot when the yeast goes in. And I put my hand on the bottom. It's about body temperature, maybe a little bit warmer, but I think this is just fine. Okay, it should be fine. Now we add our yeast. And this recipe here makes 1 loaf of bread, and I'm going to add 1 good tablespoon of yeast to that. And this is a no-knead bread, but when it, like sometimes you go to someone's house and they make something they call no-knead bread, and it's obvious that it's no-knead bread. You know what I mean? This is going to look like someone spent hours kneading it. It's going to look great. It's going to turn out just like it was kneaded. Okay, so now I've added our yeast. Now I'm going to add a whole cup of flour. Now at this point we've added about 2.5 cups of flour. And what I want to do is just keep adding flour until it comes away from the bowl, until the combination of the dough and the flour forms a ball that sticks to this thing I'm stirring it with. Right now it's still very liquidy. See, I can't pick this up. You should be able to pick it up, just barely. It should be just, there should be just enough flour that it holds together as a ball, and you can pick it up on the end of a stick. Okay, so that's, I mean, anyone that says there's an actual amount of flour that will achieve that, they haven't done this enough. You can see this is still not going to come up, right? On any given day, the flour has a different moisture level, and sometimes you need more than others. So now I'm just adding little bits at a time, because we're getting very close. You can see it's starting to go around the bowl with my stick, but it's still stuck on the bottom of the bowl. So I'm almost there, I'm not quite there. So I'm just going to add a little bit more. We're getting close to about 3 cups of flour. I don't know if we're just a little bit above. You should almost be able to clean the bowl with your whatever you're stirring this with. And it shouldn't be sticking. It should be almost sticking. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. But what you're trying to do is get just the right amount of moisture in the dough where it rises well, works well, but it's not too hard to deal with. That's pretty good there. So you can see it's moving around, right? I can pick it up with the stick, right? That's good. And that was about 3 cups of flour. All right, so that's our brown bread. You can, while you're mixing this, add a teaspoon or a tablespoon of butter into it just to give it some of that rich fattiness. I didn't do that this one here, but you can. You can also add an egg. You can substitute some of the liquid with an egg. Gives it extra rise, gives it extra flavor, gives the bread different properties, right? Let's do another one. Same idea. Okay, same process. This one's going to be a raisin bread, and I'm going to use an egg in this one. Okay, so I'm going to get my tablespoon of flour, a little bit of cold water to make a paste. Okay, I'm going to assume this is still hot enough. The last time I added the molasses before adding the hot water, you should really add the hot water first. Okay, just works better. When you're pouring this in and stirring it, it smells so much like cream of wheat. Okay, so we're at about, yeah, we're just shy of our mark there. So I'm just shy of 1 cup, but I still have to add the molasses, right? So I'm going to add my almost 1/4 cup of molasses. I don't know what this is, like 3 tablespoons maybe. It's almost 1/4 cup. Get her right in there and get it all out of there. That's good. All right. Add our salt. You can lower the amount of salt in this, and I've read that you can make the bread. I use about a heaping teaspoon of salt. You can use a level teaspoon. You can use half a teaspoon of salt. I always use a bit of, you can tell when it doesn't have enough salt. It just doesn't taste as good. But if you're on a no salt diet, don't use salt, right? But yeah, if you have no good reason to reduce the salt, you're gonna have, especially if you're entertaining guests, you're gonna have a better tasting bread if you add the salt, believe me. Okay, now we'll add the cold water to cool it down. All right, so this is perfectly at 1 cup right now. We're going to add some cold water. Oh, and I forgot, we're going to add the egg, right, yes. This is the stage where we'd add the egg. Okay, 'cause again, we want the total volume to be about 1.5 cups. You can go a little bit over, maybe 1 2/3, but every little bit you go over, it starts to become too much bread for a loaf pan, right? So anyway, we'll put in a, hopefully we got no shell in there. I should have broken that into a bowl. We'll whip the egg. We're almost at. Almost at a quarter. We're almost at 1.5 cups there. All right, that's pretty good. All right, just whip that up real good. Good. And it was just cool enough to put the egg in without it, becoming a scrambled egg, which we definitely don't want. Check the temperature. Yeah, it's pretty warm, but it's all right. You'll see the bread, I can add a little bit more water here. You can see the bread, it behaves, I've found anyway, it behaves differently when you add the egg. Just get a little different rise out of it. And you get that flavor. When I make a white bread, I love to add egg, just to get the flavor of the egg. Just the extra fat and, the yolk and all that eggy goodness. A little bit of stuff on the bottom here. All right, get rid of that. Okay, now, same process. And add a cup of flour, right? And mix that in. And you'll notice I'm not being precise, right? I mean, I will put the ingredients and their measurements in the description box and maybe even on the screen. But when you're making bread, you go by feel. You really do. So, I have rough guidelines, about 3 cups of flour, tablespoon of yeast, 1.5 cups of water, 1.5 cups of liquid, right? And remember, molasses is a liquid, so you got to think of it that way. But I'm really adding this flour until it has a certain consistency, right? I don't want it too wet for when I add the yeast, because I want the yeast to hydrate. And you notice I'm not, when you watch a lot of bread recipes or people that cook bread on YouTube, they put the yeast in a little bowl of water with a little sugar, then they wait 10 minutes for it to foam up and make bubbles, and then they do this, and then they do that. If you're making bread all the time and you're buying good yeast and using it a lot, you just don't need to do that. To me, that's often a sign that the person doesn't make a lot of bread. I make bread all the time. If you've got good, I buy large amounts of yeast and I use it, and you don't need to do all that. Just throw it in there, right? This is an instant kind of baker's yeast, and that's all you need to do, right? This will become active. This will wake up. This will start working. I got a process here for letting the dough rise, and you'll see that it has risen. Okay, now we're going to add some more flour. This one here is going to be a raisin bread. That's red. I got to add a little. Normally when I make a raisin bread, that's why I added the yeast to this. Raisin bread is a rich, like most bread, we put jam on it, but raisin bread, it's sort of got its own jam because it's got the raisins. So I like to add the egg. I like to add a little bit of butter like that, make it more rich, right? Make that almost like a dessert, right? An experience unto itself, right? Let's add a little bit of cinnamon here. About a teaspoon of cinnamon, I think, is right for 1 loaf. It's not overpowering, but it's there. Put it that way. I mean, you could go crazy with this sort of thing, right, if you really want. But I find about a teaspoon's good. It goes good with everything else. We're going to need more flour. Notice I still haven't added the raisins yet. We're going to add those soon. And I use about 2/3, 3/4 of a cup of raisins. I mean, I don't measure them, I just use my hands. I put 2 handfuls of raisins in, which is about 2/3 or 3/4 of a cup. Okay, we still need a bit more flour, but I'm going to add the raisins now. All right, 1, 2, all right. You can just put 1 handful in. I got big hands, right? But you can just put, you can put 3 handfuls in, I guess. Okay, that's mixed in real good. Very good. But you see it's still not coming up, right? So add some more flour. Excuse me. And just continue with this process. And really, what are we doing? I mean, we're stirring this and we're mixing the flour, but we're also kind of kneading this, just in a very lazy way. And I think if you have one of those bread making machines, I think they kind of work this way. I think what I'm doing here, because I'm making a no-knead bread, but what's a bread making machine doing? It's stirring the bread. How else could it do it, right? That's kind of how I developed this process. I was just thinking, what's going on inside a bread making machine, right? So now you can see it's coming away from the bowl, right? It's sticking to the stick. It's still sticking a little bit, so we can add a little bit more. It's close, really close here. And again, the reason we're being so incremental and fussy with this is just to get the right moisture level. You want the bread to be not too wet and not too dry. It'll rise just right, and just the right size for the pan, so that it has the right shape and the right size, and everything's just right when it's coming up. That's about right. I think that's fine. Okay. Okay, now we got to let this bread rise for about 45 minutes. Let me show you how I do that. Okay, so now we want to let the bread rise. And what do you want? You want a nice, warm, steamy incubation environment. Ovens are insulated, they'll work just fine. So I put my bread in the top of the oven, and closer to the bottom of the oven, I got a bowl of hot water, right? You could boil it. I just use water out of the tap on the hottest setting of the tap. You stick that beneath, right? That's going to add just enough heat and moisture, right? Where the bread doesn't even need to be covered because it's kind of a steamy, moist environment. And it's going to keep that in. Remember, the bread's nice and warm because we used warm water to make it. And because we've added heat to this little insulated environment, it's going to keep everything just right. Now you can leave it in here for a minimum of about 30 minutes. 45 minutes is good. And you can even leave it if you got busy doing things or people are in your kitchen making lunch and stuff, which I think is going to happen soon today. You can leave it for about as long as an hour and a half before you take it to the next stage. And there's really no penalty for leaving it an hour and a half. I just like to get things done. So leave it like this for as little as half an hour, for as long as an hour and a half. All right, so I just took these out of the oven and I didn't turn my camera on. So well, it's been about 35, 40 minutes and I've taken these out of the oven. I started stirring this one. This one has not been stirred yet. So you can see that it's about double, almost triple in size to what it was when it went in, okay? So all you gotta do is grab something like this. You could use a wooden spoon, but I would say turn it upside down. Put the skinny part down, okay? All you gotta do is just get a good hold of it, okay? And stir. Stir it around. And I do this about 20 times or until my arm and my wrist feels sore, okay? So it doesn't need a lot, but just give it some stirring like this. This is kind of kneading, right? This will allow or help the dough rise really well and get good size, okay? All right, this is the raisin bread one. You can see this has shrunk considerably from what it was when it was risen, okay? And I did the same thing with this. I just gave it a really good aggressive stir, okay? Before I turn the camera on, okay? So I'm gonna put these back in the oven for another rise. This next rise will only take about 30 minutes, okay? You can, at this stage, you could put them in a loaf pan, let them rise about 25 minutes and make bread. And of course, this all depends on what yeast you use. I'll put the yeast, the brand name of the yeast I'm using up on the screen when I'm done this video. I can't even remember what type it is. I go to a restaurant, I go to a store that sells equipment for restaurant owners, and I buy these big, they're like it's like a kilogram of yeast. I buy it at a kilogram at a time. You get a much better deal like that. Actually, I think this is Fleshman's, but it's not like the little tiny packs you get at a convenience store, right? It's a large 1 kilogram, like not a kilogram, about a pound, half a kilogram of baker's yeast, a quick rise, instant baker's yeast, which I find gets the best results. And I'm gonna stick these back in the incubator for another half an hour, and we'll see you at the next step. Okay, it's been about half an hour, and now it's time to take the dough out of the incubator and stick it in the pans. Now, I use these pans. They're just like really old-fashioned steel pans. I find they work the best. They're not Teflon, they're not a special surface, but they're just carbon steel, and they get blacker over time, and you have to grease them a little bit. I just use a little bit of butter. That's all it takes. I find using one of these baster things, you use this for barbecuing ribs and stuff, right? Anyway, one of these works just fine. A little bit of butter on it and just slather it around, right? For that matter, it's good for buttering the loaves when they come out. All right, those are all a little bit of excess here. These are all greased out. If you do this, they'll pop right out of the pans when you're done. Okay, let's take this out of the oven and see what we got here. All right, so these have really, let me close that up. Don't want to lose what heat's in there. They've really risen up nice, right? We got some height here. Okay, so that's the second rise. Now again, you can make your bread with just one rise, but if you do 2 rises, you get a better bread. So now you just give it another vigorous stir like this. Okay, helps to have a spatula of some kind. There we go. So I'll finish giving this a stir. Again, it's like maybe 20 good vigorous turns. That's all it's needed. You can see a little bit of this is sticking to the bowl, but it's close enough. Okay, so I'll just try to get as much out of that as I can, and not to be perfect. I'll put it into the loaf pan. Now there's ways to do this without loaf pans, and depending on the comments, I have a way of cooking bread in a fry pan. You have to put the fry pan in the oven, but if, let's say you're living in an apartment or you're a student or whatever your situation is, you don't have loaf pans, or you just watch this video and you don't have all the gear you need and you just want to make bread. You can put this in a fry pan as long as the handle of the fry pan can handle the temperature of an oven, and you can make a circle loaf of bread. I think they call them artisanal. In a fry pan, you can totally do that. That works. Anyway, all I do is just spread it out into the pan so it's evenly distributed. You can even give it a few shakes like that. But it should look like that when you've got it in there, okay? So we'll do the same thing with this one. Right? Really good stir. I sort of anchor it into my stomach. I'm also doing this so you can see, but I hold it into my stomach so it stays in place. You see how that dough is sticking to the stick, right? That means we got the right ratio of water to flour. Okay, a little bit of a workout, but that's all the work we have to do. That didn't take long. We've made 2 loaves of bread. This is the raisin bread. All right, let's get that in there. Now I'm going to show you a great trick for cleaning these pots for the next stage. So what I do is I put this back in the oven for about 20 minutes to rise, and I fill these up with hot water and put them in the bottom of the oven. So all that heat and all that steam helps the bread to rise, but it also soaks the pans, makes them easier to clean, right? Now I tend to make about 2 loaves at a time because it takes just as much energy from the oven to make 2 loaves as it does 1. Anyway, it just makes sense to make 2 loaves. Usually I make a loaf of white bread and a loaf of brown bread because my kids, they like all of it, but I think they like the white bread the most. Anyway, this is all about the brown bread. Look at that, we got a raisin in there. It does not belong. Okay, so I'm going to put this in the oven. The same way I did before, I'm just going to fill this up with both of these up with hot tap water and put those in the bottom of the oven, right, to heat up the oven and to create lots of mist and moisture and let these rise. And it should only take about 20 minutes. All right, so it's only been 15 minutes. Sometimes this takes 20 minutes, and sometimes this takes 25 minutes, and sometimes this takes 30 minutes. It depends on the yeast and the day and just, you know, luck. But these are ready, okay? So, I mean, usually what I look for is that the dough, I'm gonna try to get this the right angle, but the dough is like 1/2 inch, what's that, like 2 centimeters higher than the lip. Okay, that's about as high as you want it to be before you turn the oven on. Okay, so those have risen enough, and today, for whatever reason, this only took 15 minutes. Sometimes this last rise takes 20 minutes, sometimes it takes 25, but it's time to turn the oven on. So, because this is brown bread and it's got a higher sugar content than most bread, I'm going to turn the oven to 375 Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. It's a cold oven right now. I'm just going to leave these in here, 375. For 45 minutes. That's all it'll take. Okay, so it's been 45 minutes. Let's take these out of the oven and see what they look like. 1, 2. A slightly better rise from the raisin bread that had the egg, but they both turned out pretty good. Okay, so there we go. That's kind of hot right now, but the hot potato routine. Just about the right size for fitting in the toaster. Okay. Now, all I do anyway, is I like to brush a little butter on them, right, like this, on the tops. It helps, I don't know what it does. Makes them shiny. Maybe it helps them last longer. Maybe it gives them a nice flavor because the butter kind of absorbs in. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why. I have to look that up one of these days. But it definitely gives them a nice shiny look. Okay. Anyway, these are just fresh. I mean, everybody has that instinct to eat the bread when it's fresh out of the oven, but it's the wrong time to cut into a loaf. It's all soft and spongy, and the moisture levels. Right now, what we've got is something that's fairly dry on the outside and fairly moist on the inside. We need the moisture levels to find an equilibrium, and so the bread a little bit firmer but still springy. So we gotta wait 30, 45 minutes for these to just rest like this before we cut into them and give them a try. So we'll see you at that point, all right? All right, so it's been, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes, and it's time to cut into these and see what we got. So I'm gonna bring the camera in a little bit and cut these things open. I got a house full of people here and everyone wants a piece of this after I finish this video. So we'll start with the raisin. Cut the end off. Yeah, so you can see it's soft, fluffy. Smells good. Raisin, very soft. And you can see the raisin, it rose, oh, I'd say a little, this is the raisin over here. Rose a little bit more, right, because we had the egg in there. Now let's just try the brown bread. Now look at that. Yeah, see, if I'd cut this immediately after cooking, it would really squish when you're trying to cut it. Oh my goodness, it smells so good. Yeah, very soft. Right, you can see the texture, it does not look like it came out of a machine. It looks like hand kneaded bread, even though we didn't do that. All right, this is a very easy bread to make. Now let's have a bite and see what we got. That's one of these things a lot of people worry about, making homemade bread, because they think they're going to eat too much bread, that sort of thing. If you do it often enough, you do get used to having it around. You still, I mean, it's still delicious, right? But you can get used to having it around. I make bread almost every week, usually about 2 loaves a week. Let's see now. Let's start with just the brown bread. See what we got with that. Yeah. That's really good. I can't wait to have this for breakfast tomorrow. It's soft and sweet, but not too sweet. Salty, not too salty. Just the right amount. It's not that it's salty, it's just there's the right amount of salt. Right? With the right amount of salt, you can taste everything that much better. Let's try the raisin. Oh, there's something about adding the egg. Just takes it to a whole nother level. And see, the raisin bread has the same amount of sweetness as the brown, but then you've got the raisins to take it up another little notch, right? Almost like it's been sprinkled with a little extra sugar. And it has the cinnamon too. You can just taste that. It's not overpowering. It doesn't taste like cinnamon. It's just there. Anyway. Man, that's good. Really good. I'm going to make some tea now and enjoy the rest of this and try not to eat anymore. If you're craving homemade bread over the holidays, you got some time, you're around the house. I mean, this is not hard to do. You just have to be around, right? You can't really be out of the kitchen, because you do something, you wait half an hour. You do another thing, you wait half an hour. You do another thing, you wait half an hour. It's that sort of thing, right? So if you're just stuck in the house, for whatever reason, this is not hard to do, but it does take a bit of time because there's all these waiting periods. Other than that, it's not very labor intensive, right? There's just the steps and you got to do everything the right way. But once you've done it a few times, you don't even have to think about it. It's just this really simple set of tasks that you do to make bread. And it's always worthwhile to make loaves 2 at a time if you get a lot of mouths to feed, because you can even make 3 at a time, right? Because about 3 will fit in the oven. And I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. I'm going to have the recipe for this and detailed instructions and everything on my Substack page, maritimegardening.substack.com, in just a few days. What would it be? It would be the day, like Boxing Day, I think. Boxing Day. That's the Tuesday. Every Tuesday I put out a new article. The recipe for this will be on that day. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Until next time, have fun in your garden, have fun in your kitchen. See ya.